important to me is that unlike the traditional comic book industry, manga has a very high readership of female fans, which is typically elusive to the, say, Marvel, DC universe. Now, storytelling itself is, I think, a great way to convey a message. We all obviously enjoy hearing lectures and attending conferences. One of the great things about TED is all their talks online. And there are plenty of science communicators that are great at communicating science via documentaries and science programming and talks. I mean, many of them here today. But what's special about storytelling, about fiction, movies, comic books, novels, is you can make more of an emotional argument for things. And I like to argue that it's a more personal relationship between a writer and a reader than I think you can get with a speaker and an audience. One of my favorite examples is the film Inception, to sort of get across the idea of how storytelling can implant an idea into an audience. Now, in the film, each character could represent part of a crew in a film. You have the main character, Leonardo DiCaprio, as the director. He's the one that coordinates the rest of the crew members to have this goal of planting a message into the audience, which in the film's story is one person. And so the rest of the characters, you have the producer who helps the director. You have the screenwriter, which the character Ariadne sort of builds. She's the architect of this dream world that they're setting up for the Mark to implant this idea in his head. You have the money, Saito, who's the guy that's commissioning them to make this piece. And then you have Eames, who's the actor. He can change his appearance in the dream world to manipulate the Mark or the audience. Now, to me, as a writer, this resonates with me because it's what you do when you're writing fiction is you have a message, and instead of knocking people over the head with it, you build a world just like the dream world in Inception. And you take the reader or the audience through this world you've built, and they experience the world through your characters. And I think in this manner, people can become more emotionally attached to that idea or message. And like in Inception, they're trying to plant just the seed of an idea so that it grows in the Mark's mind afterwards, and he ends up believing that it was his idea. I think a bit of that can happen in storytelling, where you plant this seed of a message, and people can come away from a book or a movie feeling like they found that message in the movie rather than they were just told this idea. It feels more participatory, like we took that journey together. And I think this is a great way, to convey a message. And more importantly, what I'd like to do is see more entertainment and storytelling conveying messages that we care about, messages about the importance of scientific skepticism. Now, unfortunately, you usually find that storytelling's used to promote basically the opposite of what we're trying to tell. Now, some of my favorite storytelling, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. These are great stories that people really connect with from generation to generation. People really identify and love the characters. But for people who are hoping to promote critical thinking, secular humanism, if you take a good look at the stories, they aren't exactly good for promoting these ideas. In these fantasy and sci-fi stories, you have characters who are born with privilege, and these are the reasons why they're heroes. In Star Wars, you have Luke Skywalker, who is born with the ability to use the Force. You can't just work hard to become a Jedi. You have to be born into this sort of noble bloodline like Skywalker is. And the Jedi sort of rule based on this fact that they have a special bloodline. The same in Lord of the Rings. The characters with power are the wizards, the elves, and the nobility, like the kings. And it's really sort of the opposite of humanism. If you take a look, I came across this writing before, and they took a look at Lord of the Rings from Sauron's point of view. And really, he created this piece of man-made technology that could bring anyone to the same level as these noble bloods, the wizards and the elves and the kings. The ring can be used, although it's shown as sort of evil in the storyline. This is a piece of technology that anyone can use, and anyone can be elevated to the level of these people who are born with power. And this is shown as a negative thing in Lord of the Rings. Also, you notice that Sauron is the only one who gathers armies from across Middle-earth. He's a diverse army, where the good guys in the Lord of the Rings are basically, you know, all the white dudes with beards. So, but there are, of course, especially in science fiction is probably one of the best genres for promoting secular humanism. And there's also a fantasy story that I think promotes skepticism very well. So obviously you have Star Trek, which is a huge promoter of secular humanism. Captain Kirk and Captain Picard, they earned their titles as captain through hard work, through their own talents, their own merits. They weren't born captains of the Enterprise. And in Harry Potter, although you're born a wizard, you don't have to be from a pure bloodline. So-called muggles can have wizard children. And a big message, important message in Harry Potter, is the fact that they're fighting against wizards who believe that pure bloods deserve to rule over others, not based on merit, but based on how they were born. And this is a very anti-mysticism, pro-enlightenment message in an otherwise magical fantasy storyline. Unlike, say, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, where it's sort of a throwback to romanticizing nobility and monarchy and ruling based on divine power. Now, what's so important about these stories, why they resonate with us, are the characters. One of my favorite skeptical characters, of course, is Sherlock. especially the Cumberbatch version of Sherlock, if you are familiar BBC fans. But the thing with characters like Sherlock, is you typically need, Sherlock has Dr. Watson, because Sherlock, for the most part, we don't typically identify with him. Just like, say, Spock in Star Trek, most people aren't Spocks, and most people aren't Sherlocks, and so they're paired with a Captain Kirk or a Watson, so that we have a more relatable character to view this science role model through. And this is very important. And it brings me to, oh, yes, magical colored version there for you. It's important because what I'd like to bring up is a very popular series called Twilight. And Twilight receives a lot of criticism, which it deserves, because it is a horrible example of writing. Good writing. It's not good writing. And Bella, the main character, is not a good example of a type of role model you would want a young person to become. She basically does a lot of sitting around and waiting for someone else to do stuff for her. She pines away for a guy that is kind of an obsessive stalker. She's passive, she's dependent, she's insecure, she's emotional, she's lovesick. The writing is of poor quality, just based on technical, just not even what happens in the story, but just how it's written, isn't very good. But why is it so popular? Why do so many, it's not just sparkle vampires, people. The secret to why Twilight is so powerful and resonating with many young people is that most young people are more like Bella Swans than they are like Hermione Grangers. Most teenagers are kind of emo, and they kind of do a lot of sitting around and thinking of their own feelings and pining away for someone. And this is a character that is honestly more relatable to most teenagers than, Katniss with her bow and arrow and her perfect archery from Hunger Games, or like I said, Hermione is a great role model, but Bella is very relatable when you feel insecure and emotional. And, most teenagers, are kind of passive and not, or might feel, more passive and powerless. And so Bella, they see themselves in her, and she's the main focus of the story. So even though she's not a great role model, what's important is this is a character that typically in any other story would be the girlfriend character that the hero's after, or just someone who their story isn't focused on. And this is what people are looking for. It's filling a niche where most stories, if you look at comic book heroes, the women characters presented are typically not this sort of quote unquote girly, passive characters. They're very, I find, often masculine versions of women. They're very, you have your Wonder Woman, Amazon, power character, or you have the, sexy women characters. And when you look at the male characters available, from Batman to Superman to Spider-Man to Tony Stark, those are all very different kinds of men. You have people who are more comic relief. You have more stoic men. You have brooding men. You have, Superman is, like the goody two-shoes guy. And if you look at the variety of characters that men have, as an example, you have a lot more variety and choice. And this doesn't often happen with women characters. So this is what makes Bella special, even though you wouldn't necessarily want a woman to grow up to be a Bella Swan. It's important to realize that this is a choice. This is a different kind of character that's being presented that isn't often presented. And variety is really a very important thing when it comes to role models. This is, again, an important part of why I love manga. In the manga industry in Japan, there's a very high readership of female audience, but there's also a very high percentage of female creators as well. And in manga, you find a variety of different kinds of female characters. And also you have these more feminine, stereotypically girly characters who are the main focus of the story. Again, in traditional American comic books or media, these would be the characters who are just the girlfriend characters. But in these manga stories, they're the main focus. And it doesn't matter that, they are preoccupied with boys or, they care about makeup and hair and pretty dresses. They still get the job done when it comes to the conflict of the story, and they can still be heroes. And I think this is an important message when it comes to positive female role models, because your outer appearance, whether you care about flashy earrings, or you just the kind of girl who likes, sweatpants and hoodies, it doesn't matter. That's all superficial. And so the variety you find in manga shows this, is that it's your actions that make you a hero and not your appearance or the things you like and how feminine or masculine you might be labeled as. Another important thing about the manga industry that I've found is there are also great male writers who can go from writing a series about giant robots fighting aliens with tons of action, and then their next series write a high school coming-of-age romance with very realistic young women role models. And I had a friend in the anime industry ask me once why in Japan that's so different than here in North America, where male writers tend not to be able to write stories relatable to women or write women characters that, are relatable and realistic and, still feminine. And to me, right away, I thought, well, these male mangaka have many more female peers. And so they have themselves in their line of work role models of other women writers who write for women. And that, people forget that having good female role models doesn't just help girls and young women, it also helps boys and benefits men as well. And I think this whole notion of variety in characters is very important to creating science and skepticism role models as well. Because it's about variety. In the same way that female characters can be target of stereotypes and not have, a lot of variety in media, the same thing happens with your science characters as well. They're typically portrayed either as nerdy or mad scientists or just some sort of side character that the hero uses when they need science or technology to help them. And what I'd like to show in my work is that scientific thinking is for anyone. So let's show a variety of different kinds of people using science and using critical thinking to overcome the problems in the story, in the conflict of the story. I think that's the key, is to break the stereotype of the nerdy science geek in a lab. My series, Legend of the Star, I hope will do that. It has characters who are relatable, and there's a variety of them, and I'd like to show the difference between characters who use thinking to sort of fight their way through the story, and the dangers of the people who are the true believers. I think this shows the, pitfalls that the danger of just relying on faith and our, not realizing our, confirmation bias that we're all susceptible to. So, I think that is really important. Having a variety of characters, whether you're trying to have characters that are positive female role models or science role models, it's all about variety. And I think using these role models in a story where you're conveying a message through entertainment and really making the emotional argument, I think this is something that will really add to this community where we have people interested in science programming and documentaries and coming to events like this and listening to academics and science speak. I think putting more of this in our entertainment will guide people into getting interested more into the sort of the meat of science and learning. Yeah, so visit saramayhew.com. And Legend of the Star is available on all ebook retailers. And thank you so much for having me.